now be a core national interest of the United States. These are all evidence, evidence that the United States is trying to, send a military signal to China. Has China been deterred by this signal? Not in the slightest. In fact, if anything, over the last year, they have amped up their activities in both the South China Sea and the Senkaku, suggesting that, in fact, military primacy alone does not act as the sort of security blanket that theorists believe. And this is particularly important, particularly if we believe that better resource allocation within the federal government and in the US economy more generally would actually lead to a return for full spectrum unipolarity. Unlike Professor Mearsheimer, I'm not terribly confident about China's unblocked rise or effortless rise. China has, in some ways, even more internal problems than the United States does. If the United States were to do something similar, like get its fiscal house in order, I'm relatively optimistic about the future of US hegemony going forward. The other issue is the bureaucratic problem. The DoD commands the lion's share of the foreign policy's budget, staffing, and prestige. You know about the budgetary numbers. In terms of staffing, there's that old saw about the number of uniformed officers in military marching bands compared to the number of foreign service officers. I believe it's still more people in military marching bands. And in terms of trust in government institutions, what's interesting is that the US military is sort of the last institution of the federal government that commands high levels of trust by the American public, for which I say congratulations, but in some ways it's somewhat disturbing in terms of the effects this has on bureaucratic politics. The fact is that organizations that command greater staff, resources, and prestige are far more likely to get their way in policy implementation. Now, in theory, this doesn't have to happen. This is why you have policy planning staffs in the State Department, the NSC, or DoD. In practice, however, and I'm sure uniformed members of the audience will agree with me, planning is an emergent process. Very often you do first, and then based on those lessons, you then plan so that you can continue to do what you wanted to do. And so as a result, those with operational control tend to reverse engineer the planning. And this creates a really vicious feedback loop, because the competent agencies, the agencies that have operational authority and budget, are given more operational control. Again, think about the Army being in charge of controlling human environments. Furthermore, officials from those agencies often then diffuse elsewhere and wind up taking positions at civilian agencies. If you take a look at state, National Security Council, CIA, or the Director of National Intelligence, a surprising number of them are ex-military officers. Now, I don't mean to suggest that, therefore, they will all have a uniform set of views, but it does suggest that the only way you can advance potentially in your career is by going through the military as opposed to these other civilian agencies. And furthermore, the bureaucratic responses to this problem are, and I believe the technical term is, not good. The reason is that the way